Okay, let's start. Good morning, everybody. Still morning. Welcome to the Ask the Experts webinar. We will have 45 minutes for a live Q&A session. But first, we will introduce the topic for the first 20 minutes and then leave about 20 minutes for to answer your questions as much as possible. Some practicalities are that you have to put your questions in the Q&A and we will answer them so in the last 20 minutes. And if you have any other experiences you would like to share with the other participants, please put them in the chat. So first, to introduce our speakers, firstly, I will introduce myself. My name is Liesbeth Unger. I'm a partner in the Netherlands for learning, human rights, and responsible business. I've been working in CSR and human rights for the past 20 years, and I'm a human rights lawyer by education. We have also with us Marcus Leuning, the former Human Rights Commissioner in Germany and founder and managing director of Human Rights and Responsible Business in Berlin. Marcus, maybe you want to introduce Leuning briefly?
Well, thanks a lot, Lisbeth, and welcome everybody. Very happy to be here. To say a few words about what we did over the past 10 years when I started the business in 2014 and building a team that would translate human rights requirements for companies. It was a fairly new topic when the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights were adopted in 2013 and 2011. And it was important that companies understand what it means for them. And this is what we're doing. We're a management consultancy, wide variety of expertise and backgrounds, and we're helping companies understand and obviously mitigate human rights risks in their supply chains, in their own operation, and if needed, also in their products.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. And then we have also with us Nadia Cicek. She is the Global Human Rights Manager at Arcadis and will share her experiences at Arcadis and how she's preparing for all the legislation that is coming and is already there. Regarding the agenda, we will first talk about the situation now and what companies can expect also in this situation with all the legislation coming, but also specifically for the Netherlands. Then Marcus will talk about what we can learn from German companies where the due diligence legislation has been entered into force already for 1 year now. And then Arcadis will share their experiences and then we will have the Q&A. But before we do this, we will start with a brief poll with the question, do you feel prepared for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive? Please fill in the poll. It's coming. Okay, it's good to see that there are at least some people who feel somewhat prepared and also even moderately prepared, but also some people who are not sure yet and might feel not prepared. Okay. Well, thank you very much for filling in. Then that also helps us a bit to understand where you are. Always with these webinars, you have people who are very experienced to people who for whom the topic is still new. So it gives us at least an impression. Yeah, so let's start with the situation and why we also feel that it's needed to organize this webinar. We see that a lot of legislation from the EU is coming your way, is coming the way to companies, a lot about requiring due diligence. It seems like also a lot of different legislation, and that raises a lot of questions with our clients and other companies. And we also felt it might be helpful to share the experience of Germany who have already legislation in place and what companies have been doing the past year to make sure they are implementing this legislation. So maybe to start with the situation in the EU. Nas, could you put up the slide on the EU? Yeah. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what's the regulations that are currently already in place and have already entered into force. You see many different ones. Of course, there are many other legislation in the EU, but this is specifically on corporate due diligence, sometimes for different, for some sectors specifically. But what they all have in common is that they are requiring some form of environmental and human rights due diligence. And some of you might already are already working on the implementation of this legislation. I see a lot of companies working on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive specifically. And what is still to be expected are the other two legislation that you see at the bottom, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and also an EU regulation to ban products made with forced labor. This legislation is actually building on the other legislation and will probably, especially the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, will also fill in what due diligence actually is. Because that's, for example, in the Sustainability Reporting Directive, it is requiring due diligence, but it's not making very clear what due diligence actually is. So I can imagine for many companies, this might feel quite overwhelming. What we see in the Netherlands is for a long time, if you can turn up the next slide, Nas, thank you. For a long time, there was a discussion in the Netherlands on we should have our own legislation, not waiting for the EU because these might be very long processes. So there is actually a draft law pending in Parliament. And I remember when we did a webinar last year, we were specifically talking about this legislation. But it looks like this legislation is not going to be approved for the time being. And also that will not change when we have our elections in 1 week time. The government, we of course don't know what the Dutch government will do, the new Dutch government will do, but the current government's stance is to wait for the EU corporate sustainability due diligence legislation and adapt the Dutch legislation accordingly. There's also a debate ongoing on the alignment with the OECD guidelines, because the Dutch government has always made it a priority that companies should adhere to the OECD guidelines. And the EU Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is not completely aligned with these OECD guidelines. So there's also some confusion about that, and the government has taken the position that they want the new legislation to be aligned as much as possible, but we don't know, of course, what the final text will be. But yeah, the situation in the Netherlands is that the focus is on the EU legislation that is expected beginning of next year, maybe even the end of this year. We know what the final text will be, and that also will make it a lot easier to prepare. But what we are advising companies, at least for the time being, to do, and even also when the legislation is there, is to make sure that they follow the OECD guidelines. Because if you see on the next slide, you see the due diligence cycle, how you can manage your human rights and environmental risks based on the OECD guidelines. And what we see in all the legislation is that actually these steps come back in one way or another. So if you follow these steps, it seems you're also well prepared for the EU legislation. But as I said, I think we can learn a lot also from Germany, where in the past year companies have been implementing legislation, which gives a completely different dynamic, I think. So Marcus, maybe you can tell us a bit more on what the situation is in Germany and how companies have been doing implementing this legislation.
Thanks a lot, Lisbeth. I'll try to do that. Maybe we could have a brief look again at the OECD circle because it gives some basic understanding of the steps needed. First of all, I think it's really important. I would like to underline what you were saying, Lisbeth, that at the foundation of all of this legislation are the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, which are then also adapted in or adopted in the UN, in the OECD guidelines. So this is the basic system of these two is the same, and it is shaping all the legislations out there. So I think it's very good advice to say, okay, follow these steps and you'll be okay with most legislation out there. You'll adapt a little here and a little there, but the risk management, the core of the system is always the same. And it's these 6 steps that you can see here. It's the first step is always that you need the board to take a decision, say, we're going to follow this and give guidance into the company, which means develop policies, how to implement that across all the different departments of a company, of different functions. The second, and that I think is really the core of this, is you need to know your risks. So identify where you have risks, how severe they are, how salient they are to your company. You go through a process, a structured process, and say, what's the severity of this risk, but also what's the influence of the company? How closely are we linked or connected to this risk? So you need to really analyze that and understand the nature of your risks so that you can move to the third step, which obviously is very important, is how to mitigate the risks. And this is the core of the human rights risk management system, on knowing and understanding your risks and developing measures to reduce them. Developing measures sounds easy or simple, but we will hear from Nadia how much detailed work and how many different steps it actually takes and how many different aspects of a business operation can be involved in mitigating these risks. And then you have the steps of monitoring, which obviously is important. You need to know, these are my risks, this is what I'm doing to mitigate the risks, and then you need to monitor whether what you're doing is actually effective or is it going nowhere. So monitoring is really important. And reporting, which is step number 5, you need to be transparent. There's a lot of legislation asking you to be transparent and to report, but it is also important to report to your own stakeholders, which can be shareholders, which can be your own employees, which can be a lot of different people involved in your process. And it is supposed to be a very transparent process. Coming from this system, at least when you asked me, how German companies faring with this, I mean, this is also the core of the German due diligence law. And I think now you can take the slide off, Naz. Thank you. How are German companies doing? I would say there's 2 kinds of approaches. The first approach is those that have been busy with the topic before. So they say, well, we have some health and safety policies, we have this in place, we're talking to our suppliers, we know that we have a risk here or there, but they find out they don't have a good system to connect all the dots. So they start a systematic approach, which obviously is a lot of work, but it is very meaningful because it means you will be able to comply with the European law very well as well. You have a system in place which involves all internal stakeholders. And the second group of companies have or believe they have nothing or very little. Usually it's panic. worry, lots of questions, and sometimes they defer the start of the process. But what I would like to share is, everyone has these worries, everyone has these questions, and there's a lack of understanding, and there's no other way than simply starting. And what I have seen with many of our clients, that through simply starting the process, whether it's by designing a policy, or whether it's looking at the risks in the first step, or whether it's rolling out a basic training at the first step, approach the topic, start. You will understand more and more what you need to do, where you need to move. And it is different for each company. Everyone has a different business. Everyone has a different organizations. It's following the same principles, that you have a duty to care and to respect, but it is the actual management system needs to really fit your organization and your challenges. Some people start with governance. They say, that's the first thing. Who's responsible for what? Others with the risk identification. There's no golden solution or, the one way to do it. It's very much your way to decide. What's important, what I would say, is at the beginning of the process, get the internal stakeholders on board. Get the board or the CEO, whoever is in charge, but get their buy-in. That's really important. And secondly, get all the persons at the table that have an impact. That's procurement, the legal people, it's human resources people, it's other people that might buy things like services or, just look at your organization and think about who has an impact, and get all of these people at the table right from the beginning. Will make things so much easier when you're rolling it out. And they know a lot, so use it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there's of course a lot more to tell, but maybe there are also specific questions for you. It also always raises a lot of questions with me, but I don't want to take that time. So, first, I would like to go to Nadia to share some practical experience how Arcadis has been starting with their due diligence process, and where you are now, and how you feel prepared for when the corporate sustainability due diligence directive is coming. Nadia.
Yes, thank you, Liesbeth. Indeed, so I will elaborate on where we're standing, and where we started and where we're standing, and also how we are preparing for the legislation in the future. So our human rights journey started in 2021. We didn't have a human rights team at that point yet. So with the support of external experts, in our case, Liesbeth and Leuning, we started with organizing workshops with internal and external stakeholders to understand what was expected of us as a company when it came to the implementation of the UNGPs. And also did a high risk and gap analysis to create awareness and provided insights to us on what steps we needed to take to actually implement the UNGPs. And this helped us a lot as a starting point, because based on this, we also updated our human rights and labor policy, which is now completely in line with the UNGPs. And our main ambition is indeed to set up a human rights due diligence process to ensure that we, but also the business partners that we're working with, respect the rights of all people involved, and having the right procedures in place to actually provide remediation. So to implement our human rights policy, we also launched a human rights roadmap, focusing on the steps we need to take to actually be in line with the UNGPs. This roadmap contains 70 plus action points in different business areas. It's quite a lot of work. It's not something that can be realized within 1 or 2 years. It will take some time. And we're taking a step-by-step approach, because we need to be pragmatic and realistic in this regard. And to actually implement our human rights roadmap, a human rights team was set up by the end of the year 21. And we as a team are now focused on implementing this roadmap, which is in line with the UNGPs. And we try to make it visual on the steps that we've taken since then. I will not go into detail, but what you can see is above the timeline, you can see how we've embedded our human rights policy within internal policies that we already had at Arcadis. And below the timeline, you can see the activities that we've undertaken at this point to actually implement or start implementing a human rights due diligence process. and the steps that we're taking to strengthen our grievance mechanism, which is also one of the important focus areas of the UNGPs. And what we've done in first instance, after having published our human rights policy, we started with embedding our human rights policy into other policies we already had. For example, we integrated human rights criteria within the risk and control framework, and also integrated in a general business principle, just to get all the other businesses also become aware of human rights, incorporating there as well. And then what we've done is, at the end of 21, also opened our integrity line for any third party to file any complaints about human rights issues in our value chain. In the beginning, this was only open for our own employees, but what we've done as a first step was really open this up for any complaint by any third party concerning human rights to reach us. But this is, of course, not enough. It's just the first step. So what we've done as well is assess this integrity line that we have, if it's aligned with the effectiveness criteria of the UNGPs. And with the help of Liesbeth and Learning, indeed, they provided recommendations on how to improve the integrity line so it becomes really accessible for any third party and in line with what the UNGP expects of you. And we're now in a process to actually implement those recommendations at the moment. A second thing that we've also done is conduct human rights impact assessments. We started with our operations in the Philippines. This year, we also focused on Chile, in which we've looked at, are we as a company respecting the rights of our own employees within those specific entities? And indeed, also there are improvement areas for us to focus on, which we are focusing on right now. There are global action points that we need to take as a global team, and there are action points for the local entity there. And that's something that we focused on at the moment. What we've also done in the beginning is, when it comes to onboarding of clients and suppliers, we focused on incorporating human rights criteria. When it came to, for example, a supplier code of conduct, which has now a human rights chapter. When it comes to a client go, no go, we've incorporated human rights questions for us to understand a bit more what is the human rights performance of our suppliers and our clients, for them to become aware that we have an expectation, so we can make informed decisions moving forward. And after that, this year, we focus mainly on launching human rights trainings, especially to create awareness about human rights broadly within our company. First, focusing on the UNGPs, what is expected of us, but also providing a training on modern slavery specifically, as that is one of the salient issues that we've identified. And then what we've also done is, when it comes to our current clients and suppliers, we've developed a methodology on how to assess their human rights performance. So when you have that baseline understanding of where they're standing, you can have an engagement with them. We've not done that for all clients and suppliers. We need to be honest in that regard. You cannot do that all. So we've focused on a specific portion just to also learn from it, to see if our methodology is working. And once we have the results, how do you engage then, and which business relationship do we want to engage with in first instance, to also learn from it and to see how we can scale it up to a global level. And then what we've also done this year, I think as many companies, actually look at the CSRD and look at what kind of gaps we've identified. And what we've seen here, it's not very new when it comes to the gap analysis. We saw that the gaps that we had already identified in the human rights roadmap were also the gaps that we saw when it came to the CSRD. However, the gap analysis concerning the CSRD has really helped us internally to get a broad understanding of what the gaps are when it comes specifically for human rights due diligence. And this has helped us to really move the conversation forward and also put more attention on the human rights roadmap we already had, and also provided us a couple of additional areas that we need to focus on a bit more than we were already doing. For example, when it came to indigenous communities, there was already a chapter in our human rights policy linked to indigenous communities. However, the CSRD made it very clear that we need to focus on it more. So for the coming year, we will be also working out a global policy for indigenous communities in this regard. The opportunity side was something that we were not focused on because our human rights policy is focused on effects on people, the risk side. So opportunity was not really on our radar, but I think now with the CSRD, it would also be good to focus on those areas as well. And the consumers and end users was a very interesting one for us. One of the standards, as everybody knows, is focused on that specifically. And we were looking at our business relationship in a way of, are we working together with partners that are actually respecting human rights? But now we also need to look at ourselves and look at our services. Are we respecting the rights of our consumers, of our clients, and the end users of our services? So that's also a very interesting one and that we have now more on our radar than we had before. And I think with our human rights roadmap that we already had in place and with the gap analysis of CSRD, we can really move forward. And I think it's also a good way to be prepared for CSDDD that is still coming, whatever the end text will be. Because we as a company, we try to stay focused on the implementation of the UNGPs, because a lot of different legislation are applicable for us as a company. You have the Modern Slavery Act in the UK and Australia, the Canada Supply Chain Act, the German Supply Chain Act. And all of them are based on the UNGPs, but the end result is always different because of the negotiations. Some apply to X companies and up, and other have a discussion about how far in the value chain. And we think the best way moving forward, also to be better prepared for all kind of human rights legislation, is to focus on the implementation of the UNGPs specifically, because all legislation fall under the UNGPs. And what has helped us moving this work forward is really taking a step-by-step approach. Because we as a company, especially when you're a global company, you're focusing on so many aspects, and human rights is just one of them. So at first instance, we focus on training and awareness, getting indeed all the internal stakeholders on board, and being pragmatic and realistic, understanding that it really takes a step-by-step approach, and also being happy with every step that you can take moving forward. Instead of trying to do it on the most ambitious and perfect way at once, because I think you can lose a lot of internal stakeholders if you try to be too ambitious from the get-go. But that doesn't mean that we're not ambitious, but we really view it as a continuous year-on-year improvement when it comes to human rights due diligence.
Yeah, good. Liesbeth, can I comment something?
Yeah.
Because I think Nadia made some very important points. I would like to underline 2 points that you made, Nadia, which I find really important for companies. First of all, the understanding it's a step-by-step approach. Nothing's perfect. Everyone starts somewhere and you improve bit by bit. It may take a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. More knowledge, more new methodologies will be out there. New data will be out there. So it's very dynamic at the moment. So I think step-by-step approach is really, it's important to understand it that way, because it will make the start easier. If you make your ambitions too complex, it will be very difficult to start. And the second thing, I think you made a very important point by, again, referring to the UN Guiding Principles. And the core of the UN Guiding Principles is to take a risk-based approach. Look at your risks. Don't get caught up in a discussion whether this is first tier, second tier, or is it like the flowers we're buying for the table? Do we need to talk to the flower merchant around the corner from where we are? Don't get caught up in these kind of very difficult discussions, but rather take a common sense risk-based approach. What are the big issues we have? What are the bad human rights risks we have? Child labor is something you need to look at immediately, and whether and you should connect it to your business. Is it at the core of our business, or is it just something where we spend a couple of €1,000? So this risk-based approach is super important, and the political debates in drafting the laws make it sometimes difficult. They blur this, and you shouldn't be deviated from that core thing. It's about the human rights risks.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. Indeed, that is a very important message, and also indeed in all the different legislations. If you stick to the UN Guiding Principles or the OECD guidelines, you're sort of always safe. But you also see, I think, in Germany, how there can be different interpretations. And how it's also not clear yet, because there have not been court cases yet. So we can expect in the future maybe to shape certain concepts more also by court cases. Yeah, let's go to the Q&A. I see there are already some questions. You can also ask more questions if you want, and or upvote some questions which you think are really important to get answered. Some are really focused at the Dutch situation, so I will try to answer them. The first question about the possible election results and how that will influence the translation to Dutch legislation. Well, that I cannot predict completely.
Foresee the election
I cannot
results.
foresee that. Well, we have some idea, but yeah, but what the new government will be, we don't know, and how they will translate it. But what I understood last time I heard from, well, at least civil servants who are working on this, is that there is not that much space to have a very different legislation in the Netherlands from the EU, because the whole idea is harmonization. So they want to stay as close to each other as possible, but I can also imagine over the years there will be differences as well, again because of court cases.
And maybe I can answer or say a few things about Pedro's question, because he was relating to that. So I'm not sure whether everyone can see the question. So basically, Pedro was asking about the EU timeline, and secondly, how large, let's say, the possibility for national government is to change things, and because you were just mentioning that. So the timeline is 2 years. That's a normal timeline for a directive. Once the EU governments and the European Parliament have adopted a law, then national governments have around 2 years to put it into national law. And EU legislation is something which is the minimum standard. You cannot go below it. National parliaments can decide to go higher to make it stricter, but they cannot go below it. And that will, of course, be subject to national debate. So I see very much your point that it's super important to have the same legislation if you're working in different parts of the EU single market. Obviously, you want the same rules everywhere. I think the EU CSDDD is going to be a big step forward in that, because it's going to describe the due diligence requirements, as Lisbeth was pointing out. That's going to be the same for everyone. There might be different thresholds, like smaller companies that need to fulfill the law in different countries. These kind of things may be different, but the core will be the same. And then it's subject to political debate, so that you as a company, speak to your member of parliament and tell them what's important for you. I think that's also important.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, for highlighting that. There's also a lot of interest for the question, the gap between the OECD guidelines and the CSDDD, and what according to us are the major gaps. Well, there was actually a very interesting study just being done by the Dutch national contact point for the OECD guidelines on the request of the Dutch Parliament, what the differences are. Of course, that has been a bit difficult, because the text is still being negotiated, and at the time of their research, there was not yet the position of the Parliament. But yeah, the study highlights some major differences, but the position of the Parliament is already a bit closer to the OECD guidelines. And the major gaps are about the scope. The OECD guidelines are for all companies that are operating internationally. Same for the UN guiding principles. There's also the risk assessment, the focus on the salient risks that is not so clear in the CSDDD text yet. Also, the stakeholder engagement is not that clear in the text yet. So hopefully this study will also be taken into account in the new text, but we will see. And what the Dutch government stressed is that they, of course, will still look at the OECD guidelines for their policies and also their the subsidies they give to companies, and it will still remain a major guideline. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so the question of Pedro, I think that has been answered by Marcus now. So indeed, there will be some time to adapt and to have the legislation, the national legislation in place. Is the Dutch concept law on international corporate sustainability a kind of national head on EU legislation? Yeah, that was the intention. It has not been labeled as a controversial matter. I'm not sure it hasn't, because there is the whole debate on the Dutch legislation, the concept law, has come to a halt. So there's no discussion about it at the moment. So everybody is waiting for the EU text. But I think the concept law that is there will be used as a basis, because it has already, it is a start. So a lot of work has been done already, but it just has to be aligned more. Maybe the current guidelines for stakeholder engagement, maybe that is also nice to know in Germany. How is that going? I know in the CSRD there are a lot of requirements on stakeholder engagement. And the next question is also how do you prove your stakeholder engagement process? How is that in the German legislation?
So I can, before looking into the legislation, I think it's important to think about what's useful for me as a company, what helps me understand what my risks are and how I can manage my risks. So there are completely different forms of stakeholder engagement. It can be shareholders, it can be internal stakeholders, it can be external stakeholders, in the sense that the people working in the factory that you're procuring from. It can be people further down the supply chain, like the farmers at the beginning of a supply chain. And all of these stakeholders have different views, different roles, and a different impact on what you're doing. So if you're following the concept of risk prioritization, it means that you start looking at those people that are in the highest risk areas, hotspots, however you may call them, so that you say, this is where we want to start the process. This is where we want to first address the risks that we have. And then you talk to the stakeholders in this supply chain or in this specific area, which means if it's in the supply chain, you very probably need to talk to procurement. And very often you'll be surprised how much people in procurement actually know about suppliers and about risks they have seen or witnessed, but nobody has ever asked them about in a structured way. So that's one of the groups you need to talk to. And then you go further down the supply chain, factory owners, unions, activists, workers, whoever is in your supply chain. And there are different ways of addressing that. So first step is what's helpful, and then talk to those people. And then you document what you do. That's the German requirement mainly, is to document the steps that you're taking and saying, why did I take this step? So if you can say, we identified the procurement of T-shirts from India as a hotspot, or garment as a hotspot, and then you talk to stakeholders in that supply chain, you need to just simply give that reasoning. And that's the main requirement of the German law. Documentation and explain why you're doing what you're doing. But maybe Nadia, you have your own way of engaging with your stakeholders. Yeah. I don't know whether you have a completely different approach to that.
There's also a question maybe that you can then answer also, Nadia, specifically directed to you about your client survey and the training that you do and the way you do the training.
Yeah. Perfect. Let me start with the stakeholder engagement. I think that's one of the elements that we as a company also need to focus on more. How do we incorporate the voice of stakeholders in the due diligence process more? And there are different ways, of course. You have the grievance mechanism in which the complaints will give you information for your due diligence. That's one way. You can, of course, set up meetings with external experts, human rights experts, to help you with the due diligence and ask them for input. That's also manageable to incorporate. The thing that I find very difficult is really to incorporate the voices of value chain workers, for example, in your due diligence. How do you reach them when you don't have a direct relationship with them? I think that's something that we're still looking at. How can we incorporate that best? And we're considering now doing a pilot with one of the providers called Ulula, which indeed focused more on the value chain workers and reaching them via survey, so we can use that information for due diligence process. I think that will be a very interesting pilot for us to learn from and to see also how we can scale it up. But indeed, it is an element that we're also looking at, and how can we incorporate those voices more into our due diligence process. So that concerning the stakeholder engagement. When it comes to the client survey, do you mean the client assessment that we was talking about during the presentation? Because there are two things. Indeed, client survey was mentioned on the slide as well. We've incorporated, because we always yearly look at how our clients are experience are with us as Arcadis, as a service provider. And one of the questions that we've included now is asking them in the area of human rights, do you expect anything in the area of human rights of us, and how can we support you in that regard? How do you view human rights, and what do you want to achieve in that area? So that's one question that we've added there. When it comes to the client assessment that we've conducted this year and the methodology developed for it specifically, we've developed a methodology based on the UNGP. So we're looking at 3 different elements. We have a different methodology for governmental institutions, which are also our clients, and private companies, because the expectation in the area of human rights is different for both. For both private clients, companies, we have a methodology based on 3 pillars. One is looking at, do they have a human rights commitment, meaning do they have a policy, a due diligence process, do they have a grievance mechanism? Second is, do they actually have the capacity internally to actually implement their human rights commitment? And the third is looking at the track record. Have there ever been controversies, human rights controversies linked to this specific client? And in that regard, I'm very happy that our procurement team has started working together with an AI tool, Prewave platform, which is helping us indeed to provide that information when it comes to the track record, because they do a scan of all the media out there and provide us alerts when there are any human rights issues linked to a specific company. And that combined gives us an idea what the human rights performance is of a specific client in this regard. And then that will informs us on how to engage further, if that answers.
I think you answered indeed also at the same time the question about tools and software that you're using. I see that our time is already nearly up, and there are still some questions to be answered. What we usually do when we haven't been able to answer all the questions is to send you the answers to the questions in writing, and also some of the questions that we answered already orally will be in writing. We will also share the recording of the webinar with you, so that you will, can also share it with colleagues, or you can hear it back. So I would like to thank you all for participating, and especially Marcus and Nadia, and also all the questions that have been asked. We would like to let you know that we have another webinar next month that will also discuss the EU situation more, and maybe we even know more than about the EU text. So please join us again for the next webinar. And if you're interested to contact us, you can always contact us with other questions, and also subscribe to our newsletter. So thank you very much for participating, and wishing you a very good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.